All right, guys, welcome back. Dan here. And after much request, so many people have wanted me to do this, I'm finally doing my Forza Motorsports Force Feedback tutorial. So I'm going to title this A Dummy's Guide to Force Feedback. And I'm not saying that because you, the end user, are the dummy. I'm saying that because I am the dummy here. Okay, because I am just a pretend sim racer. I've got these dialed in to what I like. But what we all have to understand and remember is that force feedback is extremely subjective. So, what I may think is great, fantastic force feedback, you may not. So, my goal for this video is not to get you to copy my settings directly. I will give you my settings here in just a second if that's what you want to do. But my goal for this video is to help you understand what each one of these sliders do so that you can tweak your force feedback the way you want. I also, my additional goal for this video is to get you to a position to start with before you ever start tweaking these force feedback settings so that you actually feel what they're doing. Because there's two key takeaways here, and I'm going to talk about those. Now, personally, I have been dialing in this force feedback since early release. Okay, not since pre-launch, but since early release. So I got it 5 days or some odd before the general public. I paid for that. And I have continually been tweaking, testing, rinse and repeat till literally just a few days ago. And I have finally got this to where I'm very happy with the force feedback. But remember, I'm the dummy, so you're going to take all of this with a grain of salt. Now, as I was saying earlier, I know that a lot of you are just going to click on this video because you're going to want to know what my settings are, and I get that. So right now, you're going to want to pause this video. On screen, I'm going to put my settings. These settings are specific for a Pneumatic CSL DD 8 Newton meter wheelbase. So you may need to adjust your settings per your wheelbase. But this is my control panel settings, and this is my in-game settings, and that's where we're at. Okay? Now, what I would like you to do is continue to watch this video, which may end up being a little bit long because, again, my goal is to help you understand what these sliders do so that you can dial your force feedback into what you want, not necessarily what I want. So, before we get into these sliders, before we even get into the settings, there's a couple things I need to talk about to help you get prepped for this process. Number one, the road cars, which you start out with in the career, but any of the road cars for the most part, unless it's a high-end sports car, the OEM tires are really muddy when it comes to force feedback settings. So this game, for whatever reason, with the OEM tires, has a lot, in any car, has a, in my opinion, unrealistically low level of front end grip. Because of that, you're going to get a ton of understeer in all the cars I've used at least, that are on street tires. Okay? So what I'm talking about is if you go into the garage and you buy a Honda Civic SI or whatever, even though that car in reality would come with either a good set of all season, like sport all seasons, or even a summer tire, depending on where you live, which are pretty sticky tires, it's going to give you the base tires, which have absolutely no grip in this game. What that does is that means every corner where you really need to understand what the force feedback is doing to help you get around the track, the understeer effect through the force feedback is going to overwhelm everything else, and you're not going to get a complete feeling of what the force feedback is doing. I hope you understand that. So my recommendation before you even try to make force feedback adjustments is, one, either use a car that is much more high-end, much more sporty, that has sport tires or better, so sport tires or race tires from default, because they're going to give you a lot more connection to what the changes are doing in the force feedback. Or if you want to use a road car, that's fine, but upgrade it enough to where you can change out those crappy tires and get better tires to do your tweaking. So that's one thing. So you want to make sure that you're using the correct tires to get the feelings and the sensations through the force feedback that you need before you ever start doing any sliders, because before you ever start moving any sliders. Because I'm telling you, You're going to make tweaks left and right, and you're not going to understand what the hell they're doing because you're not going to feel it on those tires. That's very important. The second most important thing is, for whatever reason, from track to track in this game, there's more or less detail in the track surface. And the detail in the track surface is going to make a significant difference in what you're feeling also in your force feedback as you're making these settings. Some tracks have basically no detail. So when you're going straight in a long straightaway and you've got your steering wheel pointed dead center, there's no information coming through the wheelbase. Okay, that's just a character of some of the tracks here. Whereas other tracks have a lot of detail. And that's the type of track you want to pick when you are making adjustments to your force feedback, because that's going to help you see what these settings are doing as you move these sliders. My suggestion, after testing many tracks in this game, one of the best tracks to use is Laguna Seca, because that has a ton of texture all the way around the track, whether you're in straightaways or corners, it doesn't matter. So just make sure that you guys do that, because you're going to make changes until you're blue in the face and you're going to say what a lot of people say, like, I don't understand why this force feedback sucks so bad. Nothing's happening. I bet a huge reason is because of those two things. So now, with that all out of the way, we're finally going to move on over to our settings. And this is going to be detailed and long, but the reason behind this is not to just give you some settings real quick. I want you to understand what this does, at least to the best of my understanding so far. Now, a month in or so of tweaking this stuff. Very first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go into settings and you're going to want to go to driving assist. This is huge. If you don't change this, none of this other stuff is going to matter. Okay. First thing you're going to want to do is make sure that your steering, none of this other stuff matters, but make sure your steering is set to simulation. By default, it is set to normal. Normal applies effects to the steering for controller users. So if you're using a wheel from $100 to multiple $1,000 wheels, it doesn't matter. You want to make sure that this is set to simulation. Don't adjust anything if this is set on normal. It ain't going to work. Okay, you do not want those effects applied to the force feedback, because a lot of these changes will have absolutely no effect on normal steering. So make sure you've got that out of the way. The next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to tab over here to skip right over input, because I'm sure at this point you've already got your buttons and stuff and all the calibration and stuff. You've probably already got that done. So you're going to want to hop over here to advanced input. That's where all these important sliders are that you're going to want to adjust. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, of course, I've been in here and I've already fixed it, but every time I boot up this game, it backs my dead zones from what I saved them at. So it defaults, I think, like a 10 degree of dead zone on both ends for all of this stuff. What you want to do is you want to get rid of all those dead zones. You want all of these dead zones for each one of these things to be 0 and 100. So 0 at the bottom, 100 at the top. Okay, this is not necessarily going to affect your force feedback per se, but it is going to, you just need to get rid of the dead zones. There's no reason to have dead zones. I do not know why it defaults them like that. Now we're going to scroll down to the stuff that actually matters here. And again, I'm going to do my best of my ability to what my understanding is here to tell you how these work and give you my approximations or my estimations of what the best values are here. Again, this is for a direct drive wheel. You're going to want to tweak these things depending on what wheel you've got. First thing we come to here is the vibration scale. There are in any sim, not just Forza Motorsport, it doesn't matter. In every sim, there are going to be 2 different types of force feedbacks that will be sent through your wheelbase. The first type is telemetry based. So that's physics based information that's coming through your wheelbase, and that is applied by the physics model in the game. That's what people typically call realistic force feedback. So suspension data, downforce data, tire data, things like that. The second type, which is controversial on whether or not people like it or don't like it, and it's up to you whether you do, is what they call canned effects. Canned effects traditionally were put into a game to amplify the feeling you get through a non-direct drive wheelbase. So these are basically carryover effects to when the majority of people, and it's probably still the case, the majority of people probably still do use non-direct drive wheels. But again, they are fake effects, like digital effects that basically amplify things so that it feels more fun and lively through your steering wheel. Okay. The vibration scale is the first thing we will come to here, and that is a canned effect. So you can turn this all the way down and you will still get all of the information that you need to race competitively. All right. Now, I personally like some of this. I don't like it up high, but I like some of it. The vibration scale specifically in this game is a pulsating effect that is in accordance with how much loss of grip you get in the car, primarily in the front end. So, depending on how high or low you put this scale, you're going to feel this pulsing or this vibration. Bah, 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 bah. In the force feedback, again, it's a canned effect. It's not real, but it's designed to give you an idea of when you're over driving your car. So the more vibration you feel through your wheel, this should be an understanding and help you understand that you're going too fast through a corner. You shouldn't be feeling this at all in a straightaway, and you probably will not. But once you get into a corner, if you're coming in too hot, is what I like to say, you're going to get a lot of vibration here. Now, this is realistic, or this is unrealistic, and you do not need it. A real car does not give you this vibration, but I do find it a little bit helpful when I'm driving in a game because you're not getting all those realistic sensations that you would in a real car, especially if you're not in a motion sim or something like that. So personally, I like to have some of this, but I don't like it to be too high. So I put it at 25% or whatever. Yeah, it's 25%. Because it's going to give me just a little hint of, oh, I need to slow up a bit in this corner, but it's not going to overwhelm the rest of the force feedback effects. But this, again, this vibration scale is only affecting that canned effect of understeer or loss of grip in general. And I think it's hard to tell, honestly, but I think maybe it affects a little bit if you hit something like a wall or if another car hits you or something like that. It may have a little bit of a vibration, but for the most part, what this affects is the vibration of understeer. So you need to play with this and figure out where you want it to be. For me, I find it to be a 25 is pretty good for my specific wheelbase and my use case. The next thing we're going to come to is force feedback scale. This is the overall force feedback of everything the game is giving you. So this is a scaling factor of all of these items, whether you want it to be across the board, low, or higher in game. This is particularly helpful when it comes to whether or not your force feedback is clipping. Some cars have a lot less force feedback weight, some have more, and this is a slider that you're going to want to adjust depending on car. So you're going to want to get ideally right there to clipping, as close to clipping as possible, but you don't want to go over clipping. I do not change this slider in here. I keep it at 100. I also have it at 100 in my control panel, which I recommend you do also. Forza Motorsport's actually in the car settings. So the setup menu actually has a per car force feedback scaler. That's where you need to do that. So if you get into a car on track and it has too much or not enough weight, you're going to want to adjust that setting in the setup menu for that specific car on track, and it will save that. That way you're not affecting the overall scale of every car across the board that you'll ever play in the game. So I recommend just leaving this on 100, changing that in there. Steering self-alignment. So the descriptions that they give in this game are actually pretty bad. I don't understand why sometimes. I read through some of these and I'm like, what the hell are you even talking about? Not for this one specifically, but the pneumatic trail scale and the mechanical trail scale, the descriptions they have in there are terrible. We'll get to those in a minute. But the self-aligning scale, I leave at 100. because it is, in my opinion, a realistic sensation. If you're driving a real car and you're driving a car at the limit and you start to get oversteer, so the back of the car starts to kick out on you, the front wheels will naturally correct themselves and turn your steering wheel into the direction that you're going. That is something that happens naturally with hydraulic steering, newer cars with electric steering, and definitely, for sure, most people, younger people probably have never had this opportunity to drive a car, but cars with no power steering, for sure they do this. But the wheels, because of the grip on the ground, have a natural tendency to turn into the direction you're going. And what this does, in my opinion, at leaving this at 100 is going to give this a very natural sensation of what would happen in the real world and kind of helps you counter steer a little bit as you lose rear end grip. Okay. Now we're going to go to mechanical trail and pneumatic trail scale. I'm going to talk about these together. These are very important. If you go too high on these two settings, this is going to dramatically increase the weight of your force feedback. And what's going to happen is you're not going to feel any of the other changes you make. So you do not want to go too high on this. Now, again, you can read the descriptions of what Forza says these are for, but I don't know. This is just kind of crazy. In my opinion, what these do, the mechanical trail scale, this is going to give you a kind of an effect of understanding when your car starts to rotate because of loss of grip. So this is going to give you a sensation that as you start to have a rear end loss of grip going through a corner, this is going to give you like a weighted sensation through the force feedback that helps you understand that, I need to start counter steering because I need to catch this slide. Because if I don't, it's going to be too late. So this is an incredibly important thing to have. Okay. And I think by default, they had it at 100. The mechanical trail scale is pretty close to where it needs to be. But I think it's a little too heavy, so I have backed it down to 95. So it's pretty close to default, but I've backed it down just a little bit. I've tried this at very high, and I've tried this very low just to see what the deal is with each. If you go too high, there's so much weight in the wheel, you don't feel anything that is going on, and that's just too much. If you go too low on this, I find that it is hard and trickier to catch slides because by the time you realize you're sliding, it's too late. The pneumatic trail scale is a scale factor that sits on top of this. So as you may you may or you may not, but what this does is this amplifies an effect that is already very heavy. So you do not want to go heavy at all on the pneumatic trail scale. This is going to introduce additional feelings through or because of the fluctuations in the deformation of tires. So if you're in a very heavy car, what's going to happen is initially the suspension of the car is going to take the movement. But at some point in time, the movement of the suspension will maximize and the tires themselves will deform and start to roll over towards the outside of a corner. And what this is intended to give you the feeling of is that secondary feeling that you're going to feel at some point through the process of the mechanical trail. At some point, another feeling through the force feedback is going to kick in to give you the feeling of tire deformation. You do not have to run this at all. I've tested running this with it at 0, and lap time wise, it has no factor on lap time wise. Now, I do feel like it does add a little bit of a feeling of liveliness through the general force feedback feeling. So I do run some, but I've dramatically reduced it from the 100 that it is at default. Because if you run these two together too high, it's just too heavy. The force feedback, even on a direct drive, the force feedback becomes too heavy and it muddies out everything else, which is not something you want to do. There's a good rule of thumb that I have figured out. And again, I've dialed this into where I'm precisely very happy with it now. But the rule of thumb that you're going to want to, that I have realized, is that roughly half is what the pneumatic trail scale needs to be to your mechanical scale, or your mechanical trail scale. So if you've got your mechanical trail scale at 100, you need to have the pneumatic trail scale roughly 50. If you've got the mechanical trail scale at 120, put the pneumatic trail scale at 60. So it's just a scale factor, and that is what I have found after lots of testing, that feels the most natural and it feels the best. But again, the lower you're able to keep these scales together as a whole, the better off you're going to be with not introducing too much weight into the force feedback. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, the road feel scale, that is another canned effect that like I was discussing earlier. So these are good, especially if you have a wheel that is it is not capable of producing a lot of force, like a non-direct drive wheel. These are extremely helpful to make the wheel feel lively in the middle. So where you're going to get the most out of this is if you're on long straights and your wheel feels really dull going down long straights, you don't feel a lot going on, you're going to want to amplify the road feel scale, because it's going to give you those little tiny details in the middle that just makes it feel more lively. Again, this is not going to have any effect on your lap times. You can turn this completely off if you want to. This is going to be a personal preference of just how you like the center feeling to feel. Lively is the word I like to use. Do you want the track to feel like there's actually imperfections? Is this realistic? Not really, but I do like it, so I crank mine up a little bit over the default, which is 100. You're going to have to play with this and figure out where you want it to be. It's not going to have, again, it's not going to have any effect on your lap times. It's just how lively you want the track to feel. As I said earlier, a lot of the tracks in Forza, for whatever reason, do not have a lot of texture feel. So you're going to want to skyrocket this way up on some of those tracks to get that texture back if that's something you like. All right, so the next thing we'll talk about is load sensitivity. Now, this is a scaling factor that actually has a lot to do with the mechanical trail scale and the pneumatic trail scale. This really is not going to affect any other slider here. It is just specifically for these two scaling factors. And the higher you have this, the more you will feel that pneumatic trail kick in over top of the mechanical trail scale. Because what this is doing is giving a sensitivity to the tire fluctuations. Again, the pneumatic trail scale is the tire fluctuations. So the higher you have this, the more you're going to feel that tire fluctuation over top of the mechanical trail scale. I've got this at 80, but you have to be very careful with this, because the higher you go with this, the more heavy the force feedback is going to become overall, and it's going to muddy up the other settings. So just keep that in mind. Next thing we're going to talk about here is the wheel damping scale. Now, as you can see, I have this down to 0. I am not a big fan of wheel damping, because I like to feel effects. I like to get the most out of the force feedback effects. And if you introduce damping, it's going to take away from those effects. So the way you need to look at this is, if you have a wheel that you can turn this all the way down to 0, and you do not get a wheel that jumps back and forth and has a lot of oscillation in the middle, turn this down. Okay, so if your wheel does not do a lot of oscillating with this turned down, keep it at 0. If you do find that your specific wheelbase has a lot of oscillation with this turned all the way down, you're going to want to slowly amplify this up, slowly slide it to the right until you get just enough where you don't get those oscillations like going down a straightaway in track. That's what this is for. The idea is to dampen it as little as possible, but use as much as you need so that you don't get those oscillations. Okay, the center spring scale is going to be very similar to the steering self-alignment. This is going to be a natural feeling of center alignment when you let go of the wheel. The difference between the center spring scale and the self-alignment scale that we talked about earlier is that the center spring scale is something that is always going to be present. So no matter what you're doing, if you let go of the wheel, it's going to have a natural tendency to spin it back to center. The self-alignment scaler that we talked about earlier is the self-alignment due to back end loss and the front tires naturally turning into the direction that the car is going. That's the difference of those two. I've played around with this a lot. I don't see a dramatic difference having it down low or up high, so I've settled down in the middle, but again, you're going to want to tweak that and figure out where you want it to be. All right, so the next thing we're going to take a look at is the dynamic damper behavior. This is directly correlated to this setting here, the vibration scale. So two things here. If you're not using vibration scale, you can turn this all the way down. Also, if you have no wheel damping scale like I do, this is not going to matter what you set this at. So I can set it at 40, 0, 100. It doesn't matter because I've got wheel damping turned off. But if you do have damping, what this does is as you turn into a corner and you're overdriving the car and you start to get understeer, it will minimize the damper so that you can still feel those vibrations in the wheel that are letting you know that you're having understeer. If you've got this cranked way up, what's going to happen is the damper's not going to let go. It's going to have a constant force of damper all the way through the corners of the track or all the way through the corner, and you're not going to feel that vibration that's letting you know you're going too fast. So if you're using that setting and you have some wheel damping to get rid of oscillation, this needs to be set on the lowest number possible that gets you the effect that you're wanting, that gives you the weighted feeling that you want of the wheel, but doesn't override those vibrations from the vibration scale. Okay, so that's what that does. Hopefully, I might have gone a little crazy with that one, but hopefully you understand how that works. If you're not using wheel damping, it does nothing, so do not worry about it. And the last couple things, you're going to want to keep these at 50. 50 is the center, the middle of the range here. Both of these, steering sensitivity and steering linearity, what that is going to do is that's going to make sure that your wheel is mapped 1-to-1 with the wheel in the car. And I don't just mean the steering wheel itself that you see on screen. I mean your inputs that you're giving match the inputs that are being outputted into the sim so that there's no disconnection. I honestly can't think of a reason why anybody would even do this. But best case scenario, just leave these at 50 so that everything is set up. I will tell you the difference between these two settings. The steering sensitivity is going to be a general percentage of what your steering wheel does when it's turned to a specific angle compared to what the game in-game does. So for example, if you've got a car that generally goes at 900 degrees of rotation and you back down the steering sensitivity, that means when you've got your wheel in your actual steering wheel turned 900 degrees of rotation, the in-game wheel will not be at 900 degrees. It's going to be less than that. Vice versa, on the other end, if you turn up the steering sensitivity, when you turn your wheel, it's going to turn the wheel in-game more. So like I said, this is kind of crazy. I don't know why anybody would do this. You want to leave that at 50. The steering linearity is at 50% in the middle. It's going to be a 1-to-1. But the further you get away from center on the steering wheel, it's going to change that sensitivity factor more or less depending on what you have this scale. So if you go halfway through your steering rotation, it may be 50% higher or 50% more in front of the game wheel. But when you get all the way out to the extents, it may be twice that. So again here, not sure why they introduced these into games at all, but that's what they do. Again, I hope all this stuff made sense. In my head, it's making sense, and I hope it makes sense to you guys. But yeah, so that's a overview of what all these settings do. Again, this is what I'm using, and you need to play with these and kind of figure out what you want to do yourself, because that's what you need to do. You need to get this subjective force feedback settings to how you like them. But my goal here is to get you in a position where you can confidently and do this with the knowledge to actually understand what you're changing and then feel the effects that you're changing as you're testing this out. So This ended up being longer probably than you guys had hoped and what I had hoped, but I hope it helps you. So if this did help you out, guys, please click the like button. And if you're not subscribed, please click subscribe. For whatever reason, I'm getting a lot of views on my videos, but it's not translating into subscribers. So let me know what I can do. If you're watching my videos and you're not subscribed, let me know what I can do to get you to subscribe, because it really helps the YouTube algorithm out. So that's going to be it, guys. I hope that this was helpful. Please let me know in the comments below if you've got some suggestions that I need to change here, or preferences that you like better. Of course, put your settings in the description, or in the comment section, so that other people can see what you're using as well. So as always, guys, thanks so much for watching the video, and I'll talk to you in the next one. We'll see you later.